Thanks to everybody for being here tonight. Another installment of OS Virtual Check-In, and we're not live streaming tonight, are we, Michelle or Chris? We're going to have to figure that out. The world's changing every day. So, my co-host tonight, I'm Kevin Rubel. My co-host tonight are Michelle Kempema with the Colorado Model Railroad Museum, and our buddy SPWR 54 Roseville, also known as Chris Palomares. Hey folks, thanks for being here tonight. We're on this very same Zoom call platform every Tuesday and Thursday evenings through the end of the year. So the format for this, for those of you who are new, is the first 30 to 40 minutes are interview and then Q&A after that. Unless we go to 45 minutes or unless we start taking Q&A, unless we get a ton of questions. So how we do the questions is this, because you're all muted to keep things a little sane. And by the way, this is a little different format than we do on Saturday night for our OS happy hour, where we, which it generally involves beer or some other beverage of your choice. And on that, we don't have anybody. There you go, Scott. Scott's got a glass of wine tonight. Good move. Nobody's muted on that. It's just more or less a free for all. That's the way Michelle wanted it, and that's the way Michelle got it. But on this one, we keep you all muted. So if you have questions, if you would, no matter when they come up during the program, take your cursor and move it down towards the bottom of your screen, and you'll see a nav bar comes up, and you have a little bubble there that says chat. Just click that, and you have a little chat window opens up, and you can just type your question in. And then once we're at that point, Michelle will take your questions in turn. So that's how that works. The ground rules are we're here to connect with fellow train enthusiasts and share our passion for trains, our interest in trains. So please be respectful, no trolling, grandstanding, or inappropriate comments or questions. And please, let's, of course, leave politics out of this forum. I'd like to leave politics out of every forum, but sometimes that's not possible. We're recording shows, and we intend to post them to the Caboose YouTube page as soon as they're processed. Speaking of which, I have about 5 of them to get to Gerald right now, so I will after tonight. And we're open to suggestions. You have any ideas for improvements to the chat, or if you can think of any guests you'd like to be a guest yourself, let us know, because we have a lot of Tuesdays and Thursdays to fill between now and the end of the year. So without any further delay, I want to introduce and welcome tonight's guest, which is local architect and Colorado modeler, Mark Shifter.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us on OS tonight. And you say, well, why is it important that he's an architect? Well, you'll find out in a little bit what bearing that has on the layout that you see in the background. So Mark, we'll start the way we always start, and that is tell our callers a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and particularly about how you came about to have an interest in and a passion for trains.
Sounds good. Yeah, I was born in the St. Louis area. I'm currently easing into my late 50s. So my dad had a Lionel train set when he was a child. And probably when I was 2 or 3 years old, I got a new Lionel set, but he also brought out his old kind of, I guess they're the metal ones with the metal hooks from the 40s. So he got those out, and we ran those when I was little. Ended up, he passed away when I was 5. We ended up going back to my mom's hometown in Council Bluffs, Iowa after that, and continued my passion for trains. I got a Tyco train set when I was about 11, and started just accumulating stuff through gifts and whatnot, and built a 4x14 layout when I was in junior high school. Put everything aside through college, trying to get that all taken care of. Moved to the Kansas City area from Nebraska, and lived there for about 13 years. Built a couple layouts down there. Met some really cool model railroaders in Kansas City. Got the opportunity during the '98 convention to host layout tour, and which was really fun. And got to operate on some really great layouts down there. Doug Taylor's Penzi layout, which has been in Model Railroader a couple times. He lived about, I don't know, 6 or 7 blocks from my house at one point. So that's a fantastic John Armstrong layout that he's been running forever. And then so I moved out here in '99. This is my 3rd layout. Been in this house for 7 years, and found a house that had a space that has no windows. Has it's 12 by 32, and so, you know, I've been trying to build layouts since I was, like I said, 12. And this is really the first layout that I've had where I've really sunk my teeth into it and feel like I can hold on to this one for a while. I'm not planning on going anywhere. So everything that I did, I designed it for 3 years before I put anything up. I built the room, drywalled it, lit it, put cobing, soffits, and everything in, carpeted it before I even put any bench work up, based on my previous experience where, you know, you just want to get trains running. And to me, that kind of bit me in the rear end more times than I wanted to admit. So my uncle worked in the UP shops in Council Bluffs, Iowa for 30 years. Really, that's about the only railroad background. You know, I used to go up the road in Omaha and watch the local Union Pacific switch out one of the industries, and we waved to the switcher, the guy in the engineering conductor, and they were always really cool. So, you know, just kind of carried that on from childhood throughout my adult life.
So I'm interested. I found it interesting that you mentioned about the basement not having any windows, and I imagine we've all had the experience working with a realtor that looks at us really strangely when we basically say that we're looking for a basement with a place on top to eat, sleep, and park a car and go to the bathroom. You know, because that's generally what do we do the first time we go into the house we're about to buy, right? We go downstairs and the realtor's looking like, but, you know, look at this beautiful
Exactly.
kitchen, right?
Exactly. That's happened to me on more than one occasion, for sure, as everybody else, I'm sure.
So you mentioned your third layout here, or
Third layout in Colorado. This is my 5th layout
yes.
with the Franklin Southern. I started the first one in 1986 based on a model railroader track plan that had been published, and moved and kind of worked on another layout. I actually built layouts at a like 1 inch equals 1 foot scale back in the '90s, and laid out all the bench work on the folders, you know, just a manila folder I cut out and laid that out. That worked really well. That was before I got into AutoCAD with my profession and started really to design all my layouts from that point forward with AutoCAD. And to me, being an architect, it's a great tool to use as a design tool, as a construction tool. And to me, it's been a game changer, lifesaver as far as time and money too.
Yeah, and I want to talk a lot more about that, about your use of AutoCAD and planning. Let's take a step back for a second and just tell us about the Franklin Southern, about the layout that we're looking at. You mentioned it's your 5th layout. I understand it's proto-freelance, of course. Tell us a little bit about the background of that. How did you choose, you know, the prototype, and your inspiration on that?
Right. So the Franklin Southern was a freelance name. It was after my dad's initials, Frank Shifter. I actually did some research back in the '80s, and there was a Franklin, North Carolina. There still is. And so I started to base it off of that. Really didn't have as much information. You know, we had the Rand McNally maps in the day, and just kind of did a little bit of research back then, but really didn't hone in on anything. As I got more involved and moved to Colorado, and more availability with the internet, I was able to hone in on this specific area, when I moved into this house, the previous layout was the Franklin Southern, but I had done the layout in eastern Tennessee in the Jefferson area. And there was some coal mining that was probably 100, 125 miles northeast of there that I wanted to kind of incorporate. So I kind of based the layout on that specific area. And so, but then when I started to really research more of North Carolina, the Smoky Mountains, which has always been part of my logo on my logos, it's the Smoky Mountain line. And so once I figured out that there was a Murphy branch of the Southern Railroad, and I started to research this, everything started to fall into place for me. And I found a place where that had been essentially abandoned, but there was still industries on part of it. And so I'm able to incorporate some freelancing, some what ifs, and also doing some actual locations and industries that I can model specifically. So for me, that was really a really cool thing for me, and it's really helped me to kind of move forward with my layout.
Have you spent time there since you chose this for a prototype?
I have not.
That's
Isn't that the crazy thing? I have never been there. My mom has been there. She took pictures for me about 20 years ago. I've got these old they're not Polaroids, but the old Kodak prints.
Yeah,
and I have a bunch of those. But I mean, it feels like I've been there because I can go on Google Earth and drive down all the streets that I need to.
That's right.
And it's awesome. Yeah.
That's right.
I do plan on going there though. I'd like to take some real pictures and develop some photos off of there for my backgrounds for sure.
And there are a lot worse places to go to take photos for your backdrops, right? Because
exactly, I'm sure you're very aware of that. Yeah, gorgeous area.
It's a great place, particularly that area around Asheville and out into the western part there. In fact, years ago when I was a kid, our family took a vacation to Fontana Village, which is in that general area too. Really cool area. So talk a little about the layout itself. I think you did mention. Did you mention in this call about the inspiration being Tony Custer and the Allegheny Midland?
Yeah. So
I'll tell you what. I'll share my screen and I'll show the track plan while you're talking about it.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess my original inspiration for this part of the country was two things. Tony Custer's Allegheny Midland that was published a lot in Model Railroader back in the 80s and 90s. And also, I think it was in 86, Model Railroader had an N-scale track plan of the clinch field, and they did one article about kind of the history and the background of the clinch field. And then I got a book in the 90s about the clinch field by Steve King, I think, and just very cool stuff on that. So that was kind of my inspiration and background for all that. And so this layout is taking some of that inspiration, and then I honed in on a particular area of the Murphy branch, which spans from Asheville, North Carolina, down to Murphy, North Carolina, which is near the border of Georgia and Tennessee, very, very far north or southwest corner of the state. And I obviously had to selectively compress essentially half of the line, which is 114 miles. And I begin my railroad at Silva, which interestingly enough was the location of the movie a couple of years ago, Three Billboards of Ebbing, Missouri, which won a couple Academy Awards.
Oh, yeah.
And that was all filmed in the Silva area. And so I started there, and specifically I'm modeling Silva, Bryson, which is where the Great Smoky Mountain Railroad has their scenic excursions out of.
And Mark, I just want to interrupt you for a second and make sure. Can everybody see that? Can you see the shared screen?
I can see it. Yeah.
Okay. If you can see it, then everybody else can. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
So Silva, I'm going to point to it here with my cursor. If you can see the cursor.
Yeah. Upper left, or lower right hand corner is Silva, and then
here's Silva, right?
Yeah, and then it traverses around to a helix, and that's a two-turn helix that goes around and drops down into Bryson, which is about a third of the way up on the plan.
Right
And that's
here.
about a 9-inch drop in elevation. And then, so I'm effectively, I'm modeling about 2/3 of a mile of Bryson in about 14 feet, which I've been able to do some layout design elements that Tony Custer likes. There's a specific area where there's a highway bridge and a railroad bridge that go over a creek that feeds into the Tuckasegee there. And then just farther down, I've got a couple of the blocks that are almost scale length with the depot. I haven't scratch built the depot yet. I've got a pretty good a representation of it right now. And based on my own concepts, I try to just layer all my modeling. I'm going to kind of hold off on that one for a while because that's going to be a very challenging project to faithfully reproduce that
And
depot.
that's going to go right in here, as I recall, right?
Yeah, just right at the little, just right as you walk in the door.
Yeah,
Is where
right
that's
in
going to
there.
be. And then it curves around, and I can pull the camera up as we tour. But it
Okay.
goes around that peninsula, and I've got the Great Smoky Mountain Railroad Bridge that goes over the Tuckasegee River on the southwest side of Bryson. And I had to selectively compress that by one bay of girder bridge on each side, but it's pretty accurate. It's about 130, no, actually, okay, the Central Valley Bridge is 150. I'm thinking my bridge is about 200, 250 feet long. Then it goes into some hidden trackage and curves back around into Murphy. And then that's the end of the branch, interchanges with the CSX Railroad on my what ifs. My what ifs are North Carolina and Georgia would come in and help fund infrastructure for this railroad to tie in the CSX up to Asheville and create a bridge line for the CSX and the Norfolk Southern, using the Franklin Southern as that railroad and bridge line.
Well,
So
let's talk a little bit. Let's go back to the topic of planning because you'd mentioned you used AutoCAD.
yes,
And in our planning call, you mentioned the role of, well, how do we put this? The experience of the previous layouts. And you mentioned also here the previous layout experience in building this one and planning on this one. And it seems like planning kind of took on two aspects. One being the research for the prototype, and also the planning for the actual construction and implementation of the layout itself. So, and I should add that obviously we don't need to necessarily use AutoCAD because we have some really nice model railroading CAD programs that do a
absolutely.
perfectly adequate job without having to spend the money for a professional CAD program. But anyway, if you want to talk about those two different aspects briefly, because I'm confident that based on our talk that has significantly informed the construction of this layout, right?
Absolutely. So I moved into this house in 2013, and there was a lot of work that I needed to do just on the house. So as sort of a placeholder, I decided I was going to design this layout. And while I was doing other things in the house, I was able to research, do design through AutoCAD, run through a few iterations of the track plan, started to specifically get into the benchwork design through AutoCAD. I did sections through the layout, so I would know the specific heights because it's a multi-level, multi-deck layout with helixes. And so AutoCAD allowed me to specifically hone in on grade elevation changes, the actual amount of bench work that I needed, the spacing of the L girders, all of that stuff came into play. And then as I was researching, I was still able to tweak things because it was just on the computer. I was able to tweak the track plan before I even started to build anything. Once I got through that, then I was able to pretty quickly start to build stuff because I could either print out stuff at a smaller scale or even if I wanted to, I can print out things full size off AutoCAD, sub road bed and whatnot, and lay that stuff right down on the grid and focus on that.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. If you can do it here with the mount for your smartphone, let's take a tour. Show us around.
Sounds good. All right. So,
And one thing you mentioned the other day, if you want to kind of highlight as you're walking around, is the construct. You had used a couple different construction methods for your and materials for your bench work. You want to talk
I
about
did. So my previous layouts, I'd use the L girders with blue board, and I still use blue board for most of my scenery. Previously, I'd used the blue board and printed out full-sized AutoCAD track plans, laid them out on 4x8 sheets of plywood or 4x8 sheets of blue board, and then I would just cut them out with a utility knife, and it worked pretty good. As I started doing this layout, I started doing particle board and grid bench work, because I wanted to span. I've got a 12 by 32 room, and you can kind of see here, I wanted to span that 12 feet across with no support. And so I figured the best way to do that would be to use the box work grid with particle board, and that ended up being pretty much the basis of everything. Now my staging does have Homosote as a road bed, because I could just spike in the Code 100 Atlas in there, but everything starts down here. My eastbound and westbound traffic starts on the lower level, and it continues around. I've got a continuous loop that also goes around this area, and then it dips into a helix underneath here, which you can see, and it's a 4-turn helix that goes up westbound and pops up on top at Silva. And this is going to be like a fast food row. I haven't done anything there.
At this particular location, what are the levels of your upper level and your lower level?
So as you can see down here, this is 43 inches here, and I'm at 59 inches at the top. I do have a step on this area, so it helps the operators and the yard master. As we come up into this area, I come up a good 6 inches, and you can see by the camera that it's a better height to uncouple, because there's a pretty good yard here. And so this is the first yard. This is sort of interchange yard between the branch line that goes down to Franklin. There's a coal processing plant and a couple of industries. And so the yard master has to put together trains for that. And there's also some other trains that do pickups and drop-offs in this area too. I've got an aggregate plant, and then it comes around here, and then it dips into a 2-turn helix, which we saw on the track plan, and that goes down and it drops in to Bryson. And this is one of the places where I've been working for the last 3 weeks on our COVID quarantine, working on a lot of scenery, static grass. I started to do some more work on the backdrop painting, and so I've really been excited to at least work on some scenery, because the last 2 years I've been really focused on getting the layout track ready and operational, and didn't leave myself a whole lot of time for any scenery. So here's my representation of the Great Smoky Mountain Train Depot. It's not an exact replica, but however, a lot of the details that come in, there's a 3-track approach into the depot at Bryson. They actually have a wrought iron fence along there now. They've got this little I guess it's a restroom area that I'm going to recreate with all this landscaping and pretty close to accurate off of Google Earth. And then I've created extra industries that aren't there just for the layout. And then it comes around the peninsula that we saw on the track plan. And I've built the truss bridge over the Tuckasegee River as it comes out of Bryson on the lower level. That dips down through hidden trackage again, loops back around a lower level, and then pops back up here. And this is the Murphy, North Carolina small yard. I'm going to have a train depot, scenic excursion there with a stop, more industries.
Tell us what kind of track do you use in your visible portion of the layout?
It's a combination of Atlas Code 83 and Microengineering Code 83. I also have used Code 70 on a lot of the sidings, Code 70 switches and track. So these two buildings are actually full-scale representations of buildings that exist in Murphy. There's two abandoned bridge abutments, and that's the old Louisville and Nashville line. They had a truss bridge that spanned over that up until the mid 80s, and they tore it down. Those bridge abutments are still there. And so I hypothetically created a separate new bridge that spans the Hiwassee River at Murphy. And this is where the Franklin Southern interchanges with the CSX.
Nice.
And so I've got a Cargill animal nutrition plant that's on the layout. However, it's CSX operated and it's on that trackage. So only CSX trains can switch out this industry.
Cool.
And then this goes across the door, and I do have a drop-in-place bridge with track, and that's goes back into my staging underneath where we started. And also, I've got the branch line up on the upper level that I've been working on, and seems to be a pretty good, fun little branch line to operate. A couple of guys have said that they have enjoyed doing that. So I've got 3 industries up here in Franklin, North Carolina. And as you can see, I'm trying to model specific areas. This is actually one of the streets that goes through Franklin, and I printed out just as a placeholder a Google Earth image of that road as it goes through Franklin where I'm trying to model. And then I also fictitiously created a coal operation, which there is none in North Carolina, but it's my layout.
So. It could have been, and it's your layout. That's right.
Yeah, my layout. So for now, I'm going to have coal operations. At some point, I might change it out to another industry, but for now, it's kind of fun. So yeah, that's the layout in a nutshell.
I'll shoot you one of these questions now that Jim Chittick's asked, and just remind us the size of the room itself.
The layout is 12 feet by 32 feet.
Yeah.
And so I really had to do some real design work to get the length of run that I wanted, and to have the aisle widths that I wanted to achieve, because I know I wanted to have operators. The problem that I find in trying to design a layout is that you really need 14 feet of width to get 2 aisles and a peninsula in between. And so I had to really twist, turn, and fold a lot of stuff, and to get the space between towns that I wanted to. It created a lot of hidden trackage, but for me, it was worth it, because now I've got these really 3 or 4 interesting layout design elements that I can really use as part of my operating scheme and kind of research for buildings and scenery and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's what I've been doing.
Speaking of scenery, we're looking at one right now. Tell us about your backdrops.
So the backdrops, I'm been sort of an artist since I was a kid. And so doing stuff like this isn't that big of a deal. This is pretty challenging just because I probably got 120 feet of backdrop I'm going to have to paint. A couple years ago, I wanted to scenic out this little 10-foot area of layout, just to kind of experiment and get my feet wet. And I did really hone in on some of the backdrop, getting that more detailed. The stuff that you're seeing around the layout is more what I consider blocking. So just basic blocking with black paint and actually this is just latex green that I got from Home Depot, quartz. And then I'm starting to use Liquitex and the cheap craft paint from Hobby Lobby to sort of do more blocking with the Appalachian look, with the blue Smoky Mountains in the background. And I'll probably get some more clouds and stuff as that goes on. But yeah, that's going to be time consuming, to say the least.
Absolutely. Really like the pictures that you have there in these different areas, to kind of tie in that it looks just like. In fact, Stefan, you were talking about that with your when we did your show about photos you took at Tehachapi, and putting those on the layout, on the fascia, or on the valance, by those locations. I like the fact that you've done that too, because it shows the kind of research you've done into following a specific prototype, even though it's proto-freelance. And in fact, I think you shared this photo that you're pointing to right now on your email to the Front Range division the other day.
Yes, so that was the one. This is the Jackson Paper Company in Silva, and it's still operating. And I got this off of Google Image, this photo. There's not a whole lot of stuff that I can use as far as drawings or anything, any photos of it. So I've had to take a lot of my information just off of Google Earth and trying to do the ruler. I've pretty much got the mill. It's probably close to 3/4 size of the actual mill. And I'm trying to incorporate the Franklin Southern yard into this very narrow space in this holler, essentially. And I'm just recreating that mill as much as I can. There's a big conveyor. There's a wood chip pile in real life that's on this side of the paper mill, and then they transfer pulp and whatnot over to the main plant, and then all that stuff happens on this side, and then they do recycled paper, and then they load the paper onto box cars and ship it out through the Blue Ridge Southern.
Nice.
Back to Asheville.
Well, and speaking of which, Stefan has mentioned on here that you're welcome anytime on the Blue Ridge Southern, and even riding the local to Silva over the 4% grade. That's a pretty dang good invite to get. So
that I would love to do the 4% grade of Balsam. That would be really interesting to do.
In fact,
I want to go. I'll be there in October.
Wasn't there an article in Trains about that? Not long. I think there was about that operating over that grade. I think it was.
Well, there's actually a steeper grade down at Topton, which is between Bryson and Murphy, and there's about a 1/4 mile that's almost 5%.
Well, and that's where you and I were talking about the other day, where the Topton's where the old Graham County interchanged.
Yeah, and then from that point, the Graham County was a 4% grade up into the woods.
Yeah, it was strictly shays.
Yeah.
Interesting. Since we're at the yard, show us here at Silva. Show us some of your locomotives and talk about your paint scheme and development of your paint scheme and your roster development.
Yeah, so a lot of the guys at the Front Range have seen these. When I first started doing my freelancing back in 1986, I used the SPSF merger scheme and just flipped the SF for FS and created that. And then back in the early 90s, I found a guy in Kansas when I lived in Kansas City that did custom work. And I created, once again on AutoCAD, I created a logo and then all the decals that I have that I'm still using to this day, the Smoky Mountain line, the Franklin Southern, all of that stuff that I used. And then I've tried to show over a 35-year period changes in the paint schemes. This would be phase 2, I guess, and then this is phase 3, which would have been the 2000s through the like 2015. And then I just started painting these last year. This is going to be the new paint scheme for the Franklin Southern. It's a kind of an ode to the Rock Island Rocket scheme. I used their decals and just kind of played with it. To me, it's a design. It's kind of like a design exercise. So it goes with my architectural background, I suppose.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So talk a little bit about your lighting.
Lighting, that was very important to me. So I'll get my thumb out. I apologize. I do use T12s for most of it. And then where the fascia and the balances are curving, I use basically the little basic Home Depot attached to the back of the balance. And then as I was working on the layout a couple of years ago, the LEDs got more involved. So I got these nice LEDs from Home Depot, which are a little bit more expensive, but they're going to last forever. And they have a really nice warm light that I like. Everything's wired together. And I can switch everything off at the walls. And like I said, the room itself was important to me. I carpeted everything, sheetrocked, I painted, and actually pretty much put up the balances right after I got the bench work put up. So all that stuff, I wanted it to look sort of like a shadow box because I've seen other layouts like that and thought that was a really nice way to do a layout. And I enjoy being down here. It's like being in a room instead of a basement.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Again, back to planning, right?
Back to planning. That 3 years of planning was huge.
Yep.
And I wired everything, with feeders to terminal strips. The terminal strips go to larger to the bus line. The bus line goes to power management. And I've got 2 boosters. I have a Digitrax on here with 2 boosters and 2 PM42 power management. I probably overdid a little bit, but things are working pretty good. I've had a few glitches, but for the most part, things are running pretty smooth.
So speaking of which, tell us about and of course, a lot of our guys on the call here have operated the layout, but for those of us who haven't, tell us about a typical operating session.
So actually, this is my dispatcher's desk, and it's in a horrible location, I found out. But this is the only place that I've got it. So I've got a just a magnetic board I got off of Micromark. I printed out a schematic track plan, and right now I'm using these little magnetic holders because even though it's a modern line, I've set this in modern day. The Murphy branch was historically and still is dark territory, and so I don't have any signaling, and so everything's just kind of a sequential operating scheme right now. And I'm still working on that because I was really bit off more than I could chew as far as how many trains we could run in a 3.5 hour period. And so I think we've had 3 operating sessions so far, and I've pared down at least 2 or 3 trains since then. And everything, I mean, it's still fun. It's just, that's the challenging part when you don't actually have a timetable to work off of.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it, when I'm not a railroad guy, I've had to do a lot of research, and then also operating on other people's layouts has given me a lot of ideas and inspiration on how to operate my layout. So we've got 2 yard masters, one here at Silva where I'm standing, and then the other one is down at Murphy, and then we have 4 road crews. So we've got 4 guys that are running trains, yard master on each end that are picking up, dropping off cars, and the yard masters also work the local industries in those towns. And then there's a couple of trains that go up the branch line. One's just specifically for the coal operations, and the other one serves the town of Franklin.
So as I recall, you said you have 6 people typically operating?
6 people with me as a dispatcher. I would like to get my dispatcher's desk out of the train room and put it in another room. I'm going to hopefully try to do that sometime this year. We'll see.
Some people are even doing it in other states now, which is just beyond
That's
me.
crazy. Yeah, I got to get a Cat 5 cable from my train room over to another room, which is going to be a challenge since all the ceilings in my basement are sheetrocked. So it'll be fun.
So one thing I found interesting was, and I seem to find to be prevalent a lot, is rather than operating, a lot of people love operating timetable and train order, for example, and being really, really adherent to that, and reading Ron Josaran's book about rights of trains and things like that. And that seemed to have gotten a lot of traction in the last several years. At the same time, I find that a lot of people who are professional railroaders, who have been professional railroads, actually prefer not to go to that extent and just operate their railroad by sequencing, for lack of a better word, which is kind of what you were describing, right? Well, I mean, why make it any more complicated than it has to be? But I think the bottom line tends to be, for us at least, tends to be, whose layout is it? And, you operate it the way you want to operate it. And it's supposed to be fun. And so I think that's why some of the professional railroaders tend to not do strict timetable and train order, because they're like, that reminds me too much of work. I'd rather just have fun operating the railroad and, operating it.
Yep. I mean, for me personally, just getting the sequencing down has been a challenge. I thought I had a good idea of how long it was going to take for a train to do certain work and get off the layout, and found out that I was way off on some stuff, both on the short and the long end. And then getting a scenic excursion train to run while you've actually got real trains, trying to make money besides just passengers, that's a challenge as well. Trying to get those to work. So it's been interesting. I don't know if I'll ever do an actual timetable. I don't know. I don't see that happening in the near future. That's for sure.
It's interesting that your language you were just using, you sound like a railroad official, because you said these excursion trains run when there's real trains running. They're having to make money. I found that amusing, because you sound a whole lot like a railroad official when you say.
I mean, obviously the Great Smoky Mountain is making some money somehow, but that's all they do. So yeah, I'm trying to do some artistic license and maintain sort of the charm of the line with the scenic excursion. Plus I can run a steam train, which is cool, being 2020.
Yep.
So that part's fun. But yeah, it just makes it part of the fun of doing this. There's all these aspects. If I get bored with something, I can research, or I can work on scenery, or I can work on, as we all do, models or cars, weathering, just tweaking everything to make sure it runs better. So, yeah.
Well, and one aspect of your planning, just taking a brief step backwards, that I've found to be a lot of fun, and from our discussion the other day, I know you've enjoyed it too, is when you're designing a layout based on an actual track arrangement or an actual prototype, right? That can be a lot of fun. Just the research involved in understanding that railroad, understanding what the tracks were used for, what tracks were there, even what structures are around the railroad, how the tracks were used, and how that area was operated can be really, to me, can be a really fulfilling part of the hobby.
It's been really fun for me because, like I said, with this Google Earth, I was telling you on our call a couple days ago that I can go onto Google Earth and these cracks that I've put in the pavement, I'm actually looking at the cracks in the pavement on Google Earth. And now that's crazy, I know, but it helps me to really make things look more realistic. So I'm getting a basis of, taking joint compound and just latex paint and getting these cracks, and it's starting to look like more like asphalt. I haven't done any weathering yet.
Great.
But I played with so many types of material for roads. I've got Ken Patterson's concrete compound stuff that he uses here. Yeah. I've got foam core for the sidewalks and the curb, carved out the curb and gutter out of the joint compound. I'm using, I think I said this on my email to the Front Range guys, I'm using the spackling compound that's flexible for the grade crossings because I couldn't buy anything commercially because it's on a curve. And so I had to do all that and kind of experiment with texture and colors and all that stuff. But I've got at least 4 kinds of materials here just for roads.
That's pretty impressive. One thing now that you're pointing at the Bryson City Depot area that I noticed about both your track plan and the tour, our photo tour of the layout here, is you can tell that you're an architect because and this isn't your first rodeo as far as architectural models, because you pay particular attention to the details such as curbs and gutters and all the curbing and the planter areas for the tourist railroad parking lot here, which I find pretty interesting, and I find it just another step in realism.
Yeah, I think my architectural stuff comes in with this because I've got an accessible ramp that's going from the sidewalk, and I use spackling paste to blend into the actual styrene platform. And then I used some of the JTT interlocking pavers here, put a yellow a hazard for the step there. And yeah, it's all part of fun. And the actual curb and gutter was from a couple of the Facebook posts that, was it Pella Soberg?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he did a couple of dioramas with curb and gutter that I thought were just unbelievably realistic. So I thought I would try it out. It's really not as bad as I thought it was going to be to do.
Awesome.
Can I jump in real quick?
I was going to say, Michelle,
I have a picture. I don't know if you can see it. That's the 3 tracks right there. I was just there 2 years ago, and you've done a great job. That looks just like the real thing. The only thing you're missing is the giant blue gift shop where they actually do make all their money at the railroad.
Yeah, and that's actually supposed to be right here, and I had to. That's the block I had to cut out because that takes up a whole block on its own.
It does. It's big. Yeah. It's really nice.
Yeah. Wow.
So these houses are actually like the next block to the east, and they're just representations of it, but it's pretty close to what the prototype is.
And your mountains are really, really nice. I want to say, having photographed the Great Smokies a lot, your color is right on with the depth there and the blues in the back.
Yeah, I like the ones in the background. That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So we don't have a lot of questions. What we do have, Michelle, we have a lot of comments, and I think we have some questions in there too. So you want to run through those? Go ahead.
I can. First of all, Scott Ogle says that switching your coal operation is super fun.
Yep. Yep. You did say that. Yep.
And Sathan is welcoming you on anytime for a ride, and I want to go too because I'll be out there.
Oh, I definitely want to do that. I'll take them up on that. That'd
We
be
should
so
go at the
much
same time because I could drive and you won't get lost because I know my way around.
fun. Nice.
Not
Even
easy.
better.
I want to be part of that trip.
The secondary bridge the piers are a really cool touch.
I thought
According,
that was, I agree.
Yeah.
I think that's a really cool touch.
I agree. I love the bridge over the Tuskegee. I think I have video of going over that somewhere.
That's pretty much where they do all of the photography for the Great Smoky Mountains is off that bridge.
Yeah, it's beautiful, just beautiful. Let's see, am I going down here? One guy's really impressed with how much modeling you have in a 12 by 32, which is amazing.
In operation.
Oh, Stefan has an interesting comment. He says he loves your Silvacine. It's so cool. It's a 6-car spot in real life, and it takes all of our 2 GB39s to get 6 loads up and over the grade to Hendersonville. That must be pretty.
Really? Wow. That's crazy.
Chris says the large industries.
So this might be an example where the prototype train, the car limit is less than what you'd have on the model, right? You'd have to do
yes. Yeah, my ruling grade is 2.5% in the helixes, so I do have to have at least 2 locomotives to get a 14-car train up the helix. But yeah, I chose not to model those extreme grades on purpose, because that's the problem with the Murphy branch is those 2 just terrible grades that don't allow that. It didn't allow that line to really expand or prosper.
Right.
Stefan also has an interesting fact for you. He says that they still interchange with the Great Smoky Mountain, and because they have freight, they have roughly 10 to 20 cars a year. So they do run a little freight on there. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I noticed something on Google Earth this week that there was railroad ties down at the Nantahala outdoor center where they do the whitewater rafting, and so I noticed that on the Google Earth. So they had to have brought him down from Asheville somehow. So yeah,
they have them in the yard there at the Nantahala Gorge. I've seen that too.
Oh, have
you know,
you?
we were talking the other day. We were talking in a planning call about the 2 paper mills, the one at the Champion at Canton and the one at Silva being employee-owned companies now, and the Nantahala Outdoor Center is an employee-owned company as well.
Yeah. And
oh, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's just this little nest of employee ownership there in the Nantahala Gorge in that area.
So I'm actually, speaking of the gorge, I'm actually going to model that, which is right here. So this little blob that comes out as exposed trackage, that's going to be my gorge. So because the Appalachian Trail crosses there, which I thought was really interesting. So I'm going to find a way to get the trail on there with some hikers and stuff. But yeah, so here's my excursion train just sitting down there on the siding at the gorge waiting.
Nice.
I love it.
Yeah.
So Michelle, John Abaticola's got a good comment here.
He says John Abaticola says using prototype track plans also solves operational challenges because the real railroads had to solve those problems before you ever modeled the track on your layout.
Exactly.
That's absolutely true. You know, one thing I just noticed the other day working on my track plan for this house was that you're talking about compressing things, right, operationally. And I'm realizing putting this track plan together that where one switcher handled a set of industries, that when it came time for an operating session, there's no way one switcher is going to be able to handle it. It's going to have on the model, it's going to have 2 switchers, whereas in a prototype, they could use 1. So that's one area where actually kind of the opposite happens.
Interesting.
But it'd make it more interesting to operate if you got keeps 2 crews busy rather than 1, I guess, right?
Sure.
So
yeah, I think
Stephen
too.
says that's why we need to tour you around in person.
Yeah, for sure.
Stephen, you're gonna have a lot of people there for that cab ride, but
and there's a tough balance, I think, between the size of your layout and how many people can actually operate it with the size of the aisles and whatnot. And for me, I think anything more than 4 would just be way too many people.
Yeah. So what other questions do we have? This has been an awesome tour, Mark. Thank you so much for this. It's been
I appreciate you having me.
looking forward to getting over and operating with you.
Yeah, I'll put you on the list.
One takeaway for me personally from this, and from every layout we see, from every story we hear about people's passion for trains and their interest in trains and where it came from, is that it's being a railroad enthusiast and being a model railroader both is, and I think Lance talked about this a couple of weeks ago, is evocative. Actually, we're creating scenes that are evocative, but it's evocative of a specific time and place that was important to us. Perhaps a connection with a loved one, and I think that's part of why we see the level of detail and the amazing level of modeling that we see on all these layouts that we see. Jim sitting in front of his is certainly that way, because
Gorgeous
there's
layout.
Yep. There's always some personal connection. So it's an exercise. It's an artistic exercise, but it's an exercise of the heart, I think, because it evokes a feeling for us. And that's why we have these rooms in our homes, or the whole basement, or whatever.
Yeah, I'm sure all of our friends that come over, like mine, they come down here and their jaw drops open, and it's always funny to see people that aren't train people walk in here and go, "Oh my God,
Right.
How long have you been doing this? 4 years? That's it. What?" That's always the thing that I get from everybody, which is it's flattering, and it's fun to kind of show people my passion for this hobby. So
yeah,
it's
that's
cool.
That's cool. And that's why we're doing this, so we can, just another way to connect and to share, as we like to say, every story is different and every story is the same ultimately, because, it's all about recreating a point in time or a place or both that was of importance to us. So, and you've done an awesome job doing that.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Of course. Anybody have any other questions?
Well, I just want to say thank you, Mark, because you just took me back to my childhood and like my annual vacation now to that part of the country. That was just like,
that's so awesome. I had no idea you're from there. I've seen you on Ken Patterson's site all the time. So that's really cool that you have a connection to that area.
Yeah, for those that didn't know, my family is from back there. So I used to spend every summer in that region as a kid.
Nice.
That's so cool.
Nice.
That's so cool. Yeah. Well, let's see. Our next one coming up is the happy hour on Saturday. That's from 5 till 6, where we just get on and we talk about what's on our bench, what we're working on. Chris may dial in one of the virtual railfan sites. We might watch trains. I can assure you that I'll be drinking a beer, but other than that, we'll just connect and talk about what's going on and what we're interested in, show what we're working on, ask questions, and just hang out and enjoy that connection. So, Mark, thanks again. We appreciate it. That's up next, and then let's see. Oh, Rich Gibson, you still on here? I think you are. You're here. You're up on Tuesday.
Nice.
So we're going to go to the Rockman branch of Maine on the Maine Central Railroad on Tuesday. So we got Rich's ceiling light there. I think Rich is on, but he's probably there he is. There he is. We'll see you on Tuesday, sir. Right? I think so. So that's the next virtual check-in. Happy hour in between now and then. Thanks for joining us tonight, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Night.
All right, take care.